Warmogs is finally getting hit with a massive nerf for this patch as its cost is going up while the passive movement speed is being lowered. Did you guys like this Warmogs meta on supports, or are you happy this will likely be the change that kills its priority? Let us know down in the comments below. And are you sick of losing games from bad teammates? Well, at SkillCapped, we turn your frustrating losses into satisfying wins. Take our brand new Season 14 courses that teach you the secrets to winning as top laner, jungler, mid laner, AD carry, and support. Then pair that with our other new courses on how to counter OP top and mid laners, master your jungle clears, or check out our new Bronze to Diamond series. We even have new Season 14 courses on macro, wave control, trading, settings and hotkeys, CSing, vision, mechanics, low elo mistakes, and the list goes on. Then head over to our Smurf commentaries. Simply select the champion you want to master and get guides from challenger experts teaching how to play your champion in the exact rank you're stuck in. You're even guaranteed to have all your questions answered by that very same challenger expert. Our service really does work. That's why we offer a rank up guarantee. If you don't rank up while actively using SkillCapped, you get your money back, no questions asked. So what are you waiting for? Click the link in the description below right now to get the rank you've always dreamed of. So we're going to start off the video by covering all the item and rune changes, and it's just all nerfs for this patch. Absorb Life is becoming much weaker as the health back on kill is dropping. Triumph and Presence of Mind priority will likely see a rise back up for this patch as a result of this nerf. Cut Down had become the superior rune, overshadowing Last Stand and Coup de Grace for many champs lately, so it's getting hit with a nerf. Enemies will now need to be above 60% health instead of 50% for you to receive the 8% damage amp. Runes should now be on much more even footing with Last Stand and Coup de Grace, and instead of just autopilot running Cut Down for every game, there may actually need to be some thought put into whether you think Cut Down, Coup de Grace, or Last Stand will be more valuable based on the enemy comp. Fleet Footwork was nerfed a few patches back, and it's receiving yet another nerf for 14.17. Heal is going down from 5 scaling to 120 to 5 scaling to 100. The movement speed drops as well from 20% for 1.25 seconds to 15% for 1 second. Nerf across the board to many ADCs here, most notably Zeri, Smolder, and Jhin, as they're the ones who have most exclusively been running Fleet in recent patches. Press the Attack priority gets even higher for this patch, so champs like Jinx, Sivir, Vayne, and Aphelios, who have been swapping between Fleet and PTA as of recent, likely just run Press the Attack all the time now. The support item upgrade Celestial Opposition is getting tagged with a nerf as the slow is being changed from 60% for 2 seconds to 50% for 1.5 seconds. Nerf across the board to many melee supports with this one, and melee supports in general are really getting hammered hard as this next change affects them too. Warmogs is getting nerfed, and this seems like it could be the killing blow that takes it out of meta. Cost is going up from 3,100 to 3,300 gold, while the passive movement speed is dropping from 10 to 5%. So this nerf combined with the Celestial nerf should lead to a pretty big shakeup in the support meta for 14.17, and you'll see we do have a bunch of changes on the tier list to reflect that. There are a ton of champion changes for this patch, but top lane is the role with the least amount, as we just have 2. Kennen is one of them, as Riot will be reducing his scaling strength by lowering QAP ratio from 85 to 75%. We don't really see this one being all that impactful, so Kennen will not be moving anywhere on the tier list for now. Rumble is getting nerfed yet again due to pro play, and this time Riot will be reducing his passive max health damage going from 6 to 5%. We've already had Rumble down in the C tier for solo queue for a while now, and with this nerf, that ranking is only going to become more solidified. So here's what we got for the top lane tier list for 14.17, as the OP tier is going to be locked down by Aatrox and Set. Although the nerfs to Warmogs are aimed more towards reducing the strength of melee supports, Dr. Mundo is going to take some collateral damage from that one. Mundo has been one of the few non-support champs who has actually liked running Warmogs in recent patches, so we're going to be moving him out of the S tier due to the changes. Turns out the Sylas buffs from last patch have actually turned him into a pretty decent top lane champ again. You can play the more bruiser style up in the top lane with Sylas by rushing Rod of Ages and then going Cosmic Drive second. Sylas absolutely dumpsters matchups like Malphite, Gnar, and Nasus, so being able to pull him out as a counter pick does have really good value. Even though Sylas is receiving a compensation nerf this patch to bring him back down a bit, we still think he'll be in a great spot, so we're adjusting him up into the top lane A tier. Moving on to the jungle now, Graves is first on the buff list for this patch. Q cooldown is being reduced from 13 scaling to 7 seconds to 13 scaling to 6 seconds, while Q1 damage is going up from 45 scaling to 105 to 45 scaling to 125. Now, we do have to take into account that the Fleet Footwork nerfs will negatively affect Graves, so he's actually going to be weaker early on for 14.17. Direct buffs should slightly outweigh the Fleet nerfs, but not enough to result in a push up the tier list, so B tier is where Graves will stay. Another ranged AD jungler being Kindred is getting buffed for this patch, as their Q attack speed is going up by 5%. E damage is receiving a boost as the flat value and bonus AD ratio on the spell are going up. E cooldown is going to be buffed as well, going from 14 scaling to 10 seconds to 14 14 scaling to 8 seconds. Now, we do have to keep in mind that you don't max E out until last on Kindred, so you really won't start reaping great benefits from the buffs until level 14 onwards. As a result, we just can't see these buffs significantly boosting Kindred's solo queue viability, so she will remain in the B tier. Brand is going to be losing some damage to his clear for this patch, as Riot will be reducing his passive damage to monsters. Brand has already been on the downswing for solo queue over the past couple of patches, with many other AP junglers just overshadowing him, so this is obviously more of a nerf to control Brand in pro play. We're going to be moving Brand down 1 tier for this patch, as he's going from A into B tier. Lilia's clear is also going to become a bit weaker, as her passive damage cap against monsters is dropping. Lilia has been on the edge of OP and S in recent patches, so with this nerf, we see it likely she now slips down to S, so we'll be making that adjustment on the tier list. So if we have a look at the jungle tier list, Amumu, Shyvana, and Nocturne are going to be locking down the OP tier. Really pulling away over these past couple of patches have been AP junglers that like to run Liandry's. Of course, Lilia is nerfed for this patch, so she gets weaker, but there are still many more great options like Amumu, Shyvana, Udyr, and Nunu. There's still some good variety across the jungle role right now though, so if you don't like the AP junglers, Nocturne, Kha'Zix, and Briar are all great, and even Wukong is back in a pretty good spot after his buffs from last patch. One other adjustment we are making to the tier list is moving Sejuani down to B tier. Sej has been quite reliant on Warmogs as of late, and it's really the only reason she's had any sliver of strength for solo queue, so with the item being nerfed, she's going to become much weaker. Lissandra has been repeatedly buffed throughout Season 14, and she's receiving another round of buffs for 14.17. Q damage is going up from 80 scaling to 200 to 80 scaling to 220. R slow is up as well from 30 scaling to 75% to 45 scaling to 75%. So a nice boost around that level 9 for Lissandra when she has her Q fully maxed out. Buffs are nice, but we don't see them being quite enough to warrant a push up into S tier for Lissandra, so we'll be leaving her in A for now. Riot's throwing Ryze a bone for this patch, as his Q damage is going up by 5 at all ranks, and R cooldown is being lowered from 210 scaling to 150 seconds to 180 scaling to 140 seconds. Now, Ryze actually hasn't been performing all that bad in solo queue over the past few patches, and we probably should have had him a bit higher up before, so with this buff, we're going to be moving Ryze up into the mid lane A tier for the first time all season. Twisted Fate is the third mid laner who will be buffed for 14.17, as his Q damage is what's being changed, going from 60 scaling to 220 to 60 scaling to 240. As a result of this buff, a push up into A tier is what we see fit. Another nerf to Aurora is on the way for this patch, as it's her R damage that's being targeted, dropping from 200 scaling to 450 to 175 scaling to 375. Aurora has been right in between an S and A tier rating over the past patch, so with this nerf going through, we like A tier as her placement for 14.17. Aurora has also been abusing both Absorb Life and Cut Down as her optimal secondary rune page over the past patch, so with both those runes getting nerfed, she will lose a bit of strength from that as well. Cat is finally back in a pretty good spot for solo queue with her AP builds, but apparently Riot thinks she's too strong, so they are issuing a nerf for 14.17. Originally, it was looking like Cat's passive was going to be nerfed, but Riot's decided to switch it up last minute and issue 2 nerfs to Q. These nerfs are partial reverts to the buffs from last patch, as Q base damage and AP ratio are going down. So Katarina will still be in a stronger spot than where she was in 14.15, however she'll no longer be on the verge of breaking into S tier, as we'll have her placed in A for 14.17. LeBlanc has been a staple S tier mid for a while now, so she's getting a few nerfs. Q AP ratio is dropping from 45 to 40%, while W AP ratio is down from 75 to 70%. Honestly, not too bad at all, as both changes are scaling nerfs, so this won't really impact the early game snowball strength of LeBlanc. As a result, we can't see the nerfs being quite enough to reduce LeBlanc's power to where she becomes significantly weaker, so we'll be leaving her in the S tier for another patch. Riot ended up overshooting slightly with the 14.16 Sylas buff, so they are issuing a compensation nerf to pull him back a bit. W AP ratio is what's being adjusted, as it's going from 70 to 60%. So as you can see in the background clip there, you're losing about 8 damage on your Lichbane spike, and that will be even less if you are going for Rocket Belt, since it provides less AP. We're leaning more towards the change being a pretty low impact nerf overall, so we won't be pushing Sylas out of the S tier. So even though we are seeing a bunch of mid lane champions change for this patch, the broader outlook of the mid lane meta won't really change that much. Sylas and LeBlanc will still remain great picks despite their nerfs. Vex and Naafiri will continue to dominate as 2 of the best solo queue mids, while Ryze is going to be an interesting one to watch. Ryze has been hovering right below a 50% win rate in recent patches, so with his buffs for this patch, we could be seeing Ryze above that 50% mark for the first time this entire season. The only class of mid lane champs that we would recommend you stay away from for solo queue are the ADCs. Champs like Tristana, Lucian, and Corki have just been battered down really hard as of late with direct and indirect nerfs, so it's in your best interest to prioritize anything else. There are 4 different ADCs being adjusted for this patch, and first up, we have Caitlyn. Kate's W cooldown is being reduced from 30 scaling to 12 seconds to 26 scaling to 10 seconds. Attack speed ratio is going up as well from 0.594 to 0.61. We do have to consider that Caitlyn will be negatively affected by the fleet nerfs, but at the same time, she does have the alternative option in First Strike that she could swap over to if fleet nerfs hit hard. Overall, Caitlyn should be rising in priority for 14.17, and we're going to be moving her up into the ADC A tier. Varus is going to be buffed in two separate ways for this patch, as first up, his Q base damage is being increased. However, the total AD ratio is being swapped for a bonus AD ratio. As you can see in the comparison clips, it is actually about a 30 damage increase on Q when you have it maxed out and are building Kraken with Rageblade. E bonus AD ratio is going up as well from 80 to 110%. The main reason that Riot are issuing these changes is because this really wonky build of Locket, Nashers, and Malignants have been gaining in popularity on Varus, and these changes further incentivize for you to be building AD. For now, we won't be moving Varus up the tier list as he'll remain in C, but he could be in need of a push into B tier for the mid-patch tier list. Ashe is going to have her laning phase nerfed a bit for this patch as base health is dropping from 640 to 610. Definitely not the end of the world for Ashe, but the change should be enough to where she falls from S into A tier. Ezreal has already been a bit on the weaker side for solo queue over the past few patches, but another nerf is headed his way for 14.17. Base AD will be dropping from 62 to 60. Seems like a pretty negligible nerf on paper, but we do have to remember that base AD is more important for a champion like Ezreal, who builds Trinity Force, because the passive on Trinity scales off 200% of your base AD. We do think Ezreal will end up losing more power than many people would think from this nerf, so he's going to be dropping down into the ADC C tier, but if we're wrong and the nerf doesn't really matter, he'll get a push back into B for the mid-patch tier list. So the ADC meta for solo queue right now is honestly all over the place. There is quite a huge disparity between the optimal solo queue ADCs and the weak ones right now. This is probably the most amount of ADCs that we have ever had placed in the C tier. Other than Jhin and Miss Fortune, there really aren't any ADCs that stand out right now either. The role as a whole just gets weaker for this patch as well, because Absorb Life and Cut Down are nerfed. Jhin does get weaker for this patch due to the fleet nerfs, but with how he's overperformed in recent patches and the fact that the nerfs will also influence many other ADCs, we don't see his relative strength dropping enough to warrant a move out of OP. It's really a logjam in the middle of A and B tier, with most ADCs just being average or good, but not a ton that are exceptionally intriguing. Pyke is going to become more vulnerable in lane moving forward, as Riot has plans to reduce his base armor from 47 to 43. This nerf will definitely put a dent in Pyke's solo queue viability, so we're going to be shifting him from S into A tier. Celestial Opposition getting nerfed is another change that negatively affects Pyke, but it shouldn't be that bad considering he does have Bloodsong as an alternative that he can swap to. Senna ended up as the most OP champ in the entire game after her 14.16 changes, so not a surprise to see Riot has a couple of nerfs lined up. Q heal base value is going down, while the AP ratio is dropping as well from 80 to 60%. R shield AP ratio is being reduced from 70 to 50%. So even with these nerfs, Senna will still remain in a stronger state than where she was in 14.15. Also, if you're building Senna with the Black Cleaver Rush, then these changes are even less impactful, and for that reason, we really don't see her relative power dropping that much. For now, we're going to be leaving Senna in the support OP tier, but if the nerfs do land a bit harder than expected, she could be in need of a push into S. Seraphine has been another support who's taken up an OP tier spot on our tier list for a while, so she's getting nerfed for 14.17. W Max Seraphine has been dominating solo queue, so that's what Riot is targeting, as they are reducing her W shield value and also increasing its cooldown. Since Seraphine had not been performing quite as well as Senna over the past patch, we do see these nerfs being enough to drop the champ out of OP tier, so we'll be shifting Seraphine down into S. So if we take a look at the support tier list now, it's really the indirect nerfs to items that are going to influence the meta the most. OP tier is now going to be locked down by Poppy and Senna. You're going to notice that a bunch of melee supports are being moved down the tier list for this patch, and that's due to the Warmogs nerfs. So much of the strength of these melee supports have been amplified due to the fact that Warmogs has been so strong, but since it's finally getting hit with a meaningful nerf, we should see a pretty considerable meta shift. Leona is one of the Warmogs users that we aren't going to be dropping down the tier list just yet, because she's been an outlier who's overperformed as of late, so even with the nerfs, we could still see her holding on to an S tier spot. So Enchanter stocks definitely rise up for this patch, as Nami, Sona, Janna, Melio, and even Seraphine can all be found in the S tier. Poppy is definitely going to be that one melee support who actually remains quite good due to the fact that she does not rush Warmogs. Almost every melee support had been rushing Warmogs as of late, but Poppy prioritizes Deadman's Plate, which means her relative power compared to many melee supports should only get better. Alright guys, one last thing, our rank up guarantee is insane. It's like signing up for the gym and getting a refund if you don't get ripped. That's how confident we are in SkillCapped. We obsess over making the best guides with top players, rigorous testing, and top tier video editing to make your climb easy. If you're ready to level up, visit SkillCapped.com and see the difference. So that is going to be all for our 14.17 edition of the solo queue tier list. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.